So people really seem to like that checkered past thing. And I can't blame them. I, in fact, am one of the consumers and coomers of this programming block. I mean, and why wouldn't I be? I'm a 2000s kid. Seeing all of these older shows that I used to watch every day after school, being on regular TV again, being able to watch them without the use of any special websites. It's really surreal in a really good way. And I think that this is an amazing thing for the nostalgic, people that grew up with these shows. But as with most things, there are two sides to every story. And I don't think we're talking enough about the impact this block could potentially have on the younger generation. Now, don't get it twisted. I am not saying that children being exposed to these shows that we grew up with is a bad thing. Quite the opposite, actually. I think this is a great thing that they'll be able to share some of our experiences that we had, even if it's just a tiny, tiny fraction. Especially with the sorry state of kids' entertainment nowadays. But what I mean is, the ways in which this could impact them socially and developmentally is an interesting conversation that I think should be talked about more. When looking at the younger Gen Zs and the older Gen Alphas, there's a very clear and startling lack of maturity amongst them. And there are several factors that contribute to this, some of which I'll get into later in this video. But one factor that I think is very major is how children's entertainment has changed since the late 2000s and even early 2010s. Way back when the dinosaurs still roamed the earth, in the 90s, when Nickelodeon rose to prominence, children's animation took on a much more cynical tone to it. The jokes became more risque, the situations became more violent, there are some suggestive themes, well, for kids at least. And all in all, there was a much more cynical and, for lack of a better term, mean-spirited style of humor to them. But these changes weren't just pulled out of thin air. A lot of the writing style of this time and the next decade and a half was influenced by situations that happened in the real world. And even though it was made in a slapstick and cartoonish enough way for kids to understand, it was enough to still draw parallels with real life situations. And when Cartoon Network came along with their original programming, they took this mentality and upped it by 1,000. I mean, seriously, take one look at Dexter's mom and tell me otherwise. But MILFs aside, many people nowadays agree that this period is when kids' entertainment was at its peak, with Cartoon Network and even the more kid-friendly Nickelodeon having that kind of cynical edge to their writing that really seemed to revolutionize kids' entertainment. You really weren't finding this on your average Saturday morning block or Disney crap or whatever. But this revolution, as I'll call it for now, expanded beyond the realm of television. As they always say, art mimics life and life mimics art. I think. And during the 90s and 2000s, many kids acted a lot more, for lack of a better term, mature than you would think they would for their age. And this is partially because of the material in these shows. With the stories and some characters being inspired by or grounded in reality, that led kids to understand a lot of the concepts and mechanics of how the real adult world works, including how unfair it is and how it won't always work out for you. And with this being the case, these kids adopted the much more cynical style of humor that these cartoons had. And the sensitive kids, the ones who couldn't handle the subtle truths in these shows, the ones who wanted to remain in their coddled, happy-go-lucky stages of their lives, were subject to ridicule and mockery because they'd crumble at even the slightest sign of hardship. And if they didn't get with the program, then there was a very small chance they were able to find success when they grew up. But those kids were the exception to the rule, and often they only ended up like that because of their weirdly helicoptery and overprotective parents, which again were the exception to the rule of that era. But surely that wouldn't become the norm in the future, right? We'd never go back to that, would we? We'd never adopt these helicopter parent tactics on a widespread level ever again, right? Right? Well, I already mentioned the lack of maturity among younger Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, so you can probably guess how well that turned out. And wouldn't you guess it, with the rise of helicopter parenting and overprotection tactics, many parents stopped allowing their kids to watch these types of shows. But what's really incredible to me is just how recently and how fast this happened. Because not even 15 years ago, in my living memory, these shows were perfectly fine to air and broadcast on the normal little Cartoon Network, and no one had any issue with them. But somewhere around, right around the mid 2010s, the tide began to shift, and it was more than just television. Veterans of YouTube are sure to recall the great ad apocalypse of 2017, where advertisers started pulling out of YouTube because of all the edgy and risque content being pumped out by these basically guerrilla filmmakers, is what they are. And that caused a devastating chain reaction in which YouTube tried to pivot its image to be much more family friendly and okay for the kids. This culminated in the now infamous COPPA laws and the invention of the YouTube Kids app, which began to incentivize really crappy, really shoddy, and really nothing kids content. And that term is being used very loosely, just to be clear. Now, because I can see into the future, I can hear you asking, Jim, what does this have to do with Checkered Past? Well, more than you might think. With YouTube becoming just as popular and a home staple and widespread as television, the kids' content on YouTube is very indicative of what kids nowadays, that being the Gen Alphas and whatnot, are growing up with, and what they're expecting to see, and what's teaching them, guiding them through their childhoods. And if you've seen the shit on YouTube Kids, you would know how much of a Disaster for the human race. This is. A few minutes ago, I called the videos on YouTube Kids nothing content. Because that's exactly what it is. There is nothing. There's no substance. It's just a bunch of bright colors and flashing lights. Like a rave, but without the drugs. For however many minutes the video is. It's the digital equivalent of wrapping the entire playground in bubble wrap. I mean, that's nothing. And what, my dear watcher, does nothing content breed? That's right, it breeds nothing minds. All the kids these days are just one simple click away from all the flashing colors and high-pitched voices that they apparently like and get something out of. I don't think I need to explain how this breeds a mindset of instant gratification and entitlement, but I will anyway. Back when television was the main option for kids to get their entertainment, if they wanted to watch a certain show, they had to wait for the show to come on during its allotted time slot. Of course, kids didn't like this. Hell, I didn't like it. I know that. But subconsciously, it helps us grow to become patient. It subconsciously teaches us that we can't have what we want whenever the hell we want it. That we have to wait sometimes. Which is another function of the real adult world. But with all this stuff nowadays being just one click away for kids to get their enjoyment, there's no patience anymore. Because they can have what they want whenever they want it. And as we've seen with all these, TikTok compilations or whatever of the kids in the schools, this mindset breeds into all other aspects of their life, which is bad. And while people have noticed the bad behavior of these newer generations, just look at that one TikTok video of that ballet teacher crying. Not enough people are trying to find or pay attention to the root causes. I mean, we're playing the blame game. We're saying, oh, it's these millennial parents, or oh, it's like it's the schools and like their lack of enforcement or whatnot. And while that's not like entirely wrong, they contribute. Again, one of the major aspects of child's development is the media they consume. Yes, in essence, we are all consumers. But we still continue to underestimate the sheer impact that children's entertainment can have on these young, developing, terrible minds. And you'd think we would have learned our lesson, especially right now with how the kids are acting, but we're still just not paying attention to that. And I think that's stupid. And it's especially weird how we don't realize this when parents, they continue to use TV and the internet as parenting tools for them to do nothing but be on the phone with their gal pals all the time. The fact that we're not realizing this is just absurd. But maybe that very mentality can also save us. Think about it. If the parents don't know and don't care about what their kids are watching on the YouTubes, then they probably won't care about what they're watching on the Cartoon Networks and Adult Swims. Get me? If we can make Checkered Past known enough and widespread enough for the kids of today to check it out and watch it just as much, if not more, than the crappy YouTube videos are watching, like this one, then we can potentially see the beginning of a renaissance, a new age in kids' entertainment. I mean, Cartoon Network's already been airing some of their earlier 2010s era shows on their regular kids block. So, if we can continue to watch those and watch the shows on Checkered Past, then that could incentivize them to go back to their golden era, to what they're best at. And I don't mean just rerunning old shows all the time, but I mean having new shows with these same cynical under and overtones that can help bridge the gap from childhood to teenagehood to adulthood, all that stuff. Because Lord knows it helped me, and it helped tons of other kids. We can change the notions nowadays surrounding children. It is possible. But it's important that children take that first step. And while I don't think Checkered Past is that step in and of itself, it is a golden opportunity and a great jumping off point and an incentivizer for kids to really explore the boundaries, to break said boundaries, to realize what they're capable of, and to show the world that they can handle some more edgy and risque stuff. To really illustrate this point, these notions aren't the first time they've popped up. We've seen these notions surrounding kids back in the 70s and 80s. And it was represented in the kids' content of that era, especially on television. The difference is that back then, kids didn't care about the notions. They went out and explored those boundaries anyway. They went out, found what they were capable of, grew into functioning, well-adjusted members of society. And when their own kids came along, they knew that they were capable of the stuff that they did when they were kids. So, they let them explore boundaries. The media changed to reflect that fact, that kids were capable of understanding these themes. So if those kids of the 70s and 80s could do it, then these kids can. They just need a jumping off point, which they have right in front of them. Or, I'm just reading way too much into things. Yeah.